All right, Franklin Gaudi. I've spent 15 years actually teaching at Cal Poly in the bioresource and engineering department, and recently transitioned to Laurel Ag Water, where now I do design team that we do irrigation design for farmers, basically. So we're a design construction company that tries to do our best to meet demands for production and also conserve water. So, all right. So today I'm going to be covering some of the topics of water scarcity, allocation, just to give you guys an update kind of on where we're at, and then also talk about some planning that we can potentially do, and that is also in the works in order to kind of make this, keep this breadbasket going, so to speak. Okay. All right. So, sometimes it's a good idea to check the batteries before you see if that will. Nope. All right. I had it in my backpack. I was probably pushing on the button the whole time. Killing it. So I'm just going to hit the buttons on the screen here. So. All right, so first I want to start with some of the background on water availability. Just give you guys an idea of what's happening here in California in terms of how much water we have. I'm guessing this is going to be new to pretty much everybody here, unless you're like kind of into it. You don't really pay attention to this stuff. I'm going to go through some of the reasons why, we have the amount of water that we have. Okay. So first, I just want to start with kind of a picture here. Just give you an idea. Obviously you can see Earth there, right? And then what you have here, this blue circle here, is all of the water on Earth, and then this little blue dot that's right next to it is the amount of fresh water that we have on Earth. So just to put the amount of water that we have available to us for consumption and for food production and so forth, compared to the size of Earth, it's very, very small, right? We don't have a whole lot. Now granted, you take all that ocean water, spread it out. We've got quite a bit of water, but unfortunately, not much of it's in fresh. In fact, if we look at this, right, out of all of the water on Earth, about 2.5% of it is fresh water. Okay. Now, if you take that 2.5% and then you look only at the 2.5%, about roughly 70% here is tied up as ice, right? So we have our glaciers and so forth, and then we've got a little bit of fresh water that's in rivers and streams, and then we have our groundwater here that we can pump from, right? And of course, this is not just California. This is, all of the world. And then if you take that 1.5% that's fresh and you break that down again, about 69% of that is this basically should say snowpack, right? This is in snow. And so that means that, if you think about this for a second, right, 2.5%, and then you multiply that by 1.5% or 1.2%, and then you multiply that by 20%. We're talking about a very, very small fraction of water that's actually available to us in lakes that we can utilize, right, around the world. So, we don't have a lot of fresh water is the bottom line. And I would also let you know that the amount of fresh water that we have today is the same as the amount of fresh water we've had millions of years ago. It's just, the cycles of ocean currents and so forth to just move it to different locations. I don't know, they're kind of predicting a polar vortex right now, right? You've seen that? And so that means that a lot of the cold is going to get sucked up towards the north, which means we're probably going to be dry again this year. But it also means that the east might get like freezing temperatures a lot more so than they would normally get. So we've got, the climate is always changing, of course. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. And so I don't know if you guys know, but El Nino, you guys know what El Nino is, right? It's basically when we get a lot of rainfall. And the reason why we get rainfall is because the ocean temperature ends up climbing maybe a degree, maybe 1.5 degrees. We get a little bit warmer ocean temperatures. And then when a storm's coming across the Pacific, it feeds that storm. That little bit more warmer temperature feeds that storm, allows it to hit landfall, and then we get rain. And in fact, if that ocean temperature gets even a little bit higher, we get what they call atmospheric rivers, right? Which is so much rainfall like in a straight line that it falls on the ground and it causes flooding, torrential downpours or whatever. And so they coined the phrase atmospheric rivers just a few years ago, because we're getting so much rainfall and it looked like a river in the sky from satellite imaging, right? So you know, we are dealing with, you know, a climate that's ever changing, of course. Okay. So just to give you an idea here, this is, I was thinking we might have a bigger screen, so it'd be a little bit easier to see, but just to give you an idea, right? This is kind of the snowpack over the years, starting in 2012. You can see we didn't have a whole lot of snowpack. These are all January photos. 13 is a little bit more snowpack, 14, 15, kind of dismal, right? 16, and actually wasn't too bad. 17 was actually a record year. I'll show you this in another chart. Okay, so really pretty, I mean, we call this a drought right through here, right? And then all of a sudden we get to 17, 16, 17 water year, and then boom, it was record rainfall, right? Now, what do we do when we have record rainfall, right? We have, at this point, that's kind of right. We're not doing anything, right? We don't have any additional storage to store that rainfall, right? So where does all that rainwater go? Right, it ends up going into the ocean, right? And I'll show you some of those charts and stuff too, but continuing on here, here's 18, right? So 18 wasn't the best year. 19 was actually another good year. So we kind of had back-to-back, or not back-to-back, but every other year there. And the way the weather patterns kind of happen is an El Nino event happens every 5 to 7 years typically. That's historically what's been happening. When I say historically, I mean like over the last, you know, century or something. Every 5 to 7 years, we'll get a pretty good rain pack or pretty good snow pack, I should say. Okay, but then as that snow starts to melt, as we get warm up, right, we need to be able to collect that water or utilize it some way. And so, and then if you look here, here's 20, 19 and 20. Now these two photos were in February. I couldn't find images from January. Often, you know, you have to wait until a perfectly clear day, right, to get the image. Otherwise it'd just be all white and you would think, wow, look at snow everywhere, but it's just clouds, right? So we have to make sure that we get it. So you can kind of see sometimes like here's a bunch of clouds. This isn't actually snow there, right? And then you can see, you know, the actual snowpack up here. So 19 was a good year, 20, not so much, right? And then you get into 21, right? And they said we're 54% of average, which isn't very good. And
what were we in 19?
19 we were like I think I have an image on it. I think we were like 160% of average or something. Yeah, quite a bit higher. And then here's January of 22, right? Still, I mean, there's some snow up there, but it's not nearly as like 17 and 19 were. 17 and 19 were really good years. Okay, so the bottom line is, right, is we always have different amounts of water available to us based on snowpack. Okay, we also have reservoirs, you know. Actually, before I show you the reservoirs, but let's just look at this real quickly. This is just a chart. So the water year starts October 1st. So basically, we're going to be entering the next water year in a couple days here, right? So we're almost to the end of this water year. Currently, the end of this particular water year, we're right here at 43 inches of rainfall in the northern part of California. You can see kind of up there, right? On average, right, from 1991 to 2020, we did about 53 inches. So we're, you know, whatever percentage that is, we're 80% of what we would normally be there at the end of the water year. You can see in 2017 there, right, we were basically twice. And then in 2019 there, we were, you know, 20 inches more. So that's, I don't know, that's about 160% or so, but right, we did pretty well in those years. And then you can see back in the 80s, we had another pretty wet year. But you can see 19, 20, 21, 22, right? We're all below average here for multiple years in a row. And this is what makes it challenging, right? Because now we have to have storage that can make us through these times. And now they're predicting that for like another 6 months, we're probably going to be relatively dry again. So we're hoping maybe that, you know, April, May timeframe, maybe we'll start to get some more rainfall. But you did see we did get a little bump just what, a week ago or something, right? So we are getting a little bit of rainfall, and it doesn't mean that we're not going to get any, right, when there's La Nina, which is cooling of the ocean temperatures, and so those storms fizzle out before they make it to the coast. Right.
Do you know why the rain year starts in October?
Because just that's when rainfall typically starts, is in the fall. Okay. And so they want to include, you know, over the winter as part of a year. Yeah. So it's like rain season rather than calendar year.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so that's why you see this says 19 and 20, because it's really the winter of 19 and then into the spring of 20. Yeah.
Do you have a sense for the total storage capacity in California of the lakes and aquifers that are used?
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna kind of give you an idea of that here.
Right.
Good. Yeah, so oops, it went too far. So the first one was Northern California. This one's kind of Central California here. You know, San Francisco's here, so we're basically straight across. You can see the average rainfall there is a little bit lower, right, than we would get in Northern California. You can see that 2017 wasn't actually the wettest year in the central region, but it was in the northern region. And you can see down here, you know, we're almost not quite half, but we didn't do very well this year. And just like we didn't do very well the last few years either, right? And so this now is putting a strain on all of our reservoirs. Our reservoirs are going, you know, they're utilizing the water out of the reservoirs, and we're not getting anything to put back in. So this is one argument that people have against reservoirs is that, well, you can build it, but if it never rains, you never fill it up. So what's the point in the reservoir, right? And I think that's a little bit of a pessimistic view personally, but but that is the view of some people. And then here's the southern San Joaquin Valley, you know, around Bakersfield area. And you can see they typically don't get a whole lot of water on average, you know, and they even got, again, about half as much this year. But they do get a couple wet years. Even that 19 year there, you know, was a little bit better, but so bless you. So, you know, we have monitoring stages. Notice all these are in the Sierras, right? So we're monitoring how much rainfall is happening up in the mountains, not down in the valley, because in the valley they get like hardly anything. So just to give you an idea here, this is, I know, a little bit clustered here, but there's two graphs, right? There's the graph on the left that shows all of California's reservoirs, and then there's a graph on the right that shows the same reservoirs. And what you'll notice is this is January of 16. So January of 16, we were all nervous, right? Our reservoirs are running out, just like we are right now, right? We're all nervous because our reservoirs run out. I'll show you what they look like right now. But we're all nervous about it, and we're saying, man, we better get a wet year, right? And then 16, 17, crazy wet winter, right? Record winter, and look what happened to all the reservoirs in that one winter. Okay. Now in this particular case, could we have stored more water even if we had more storage? The answer is yeah, we probably could have, because we got the rainfall, right? And we actually overflowed Oroville for the first time in its history. Right? Did you guys hear about that? No, Oroville Dam actually hit the stage where they were actually releasing water from it. I think I got a little video here. It will play. They were actually releasing water from it, and the dam, or the overflow, breached, and it started cutting into the mountainside next to it. This is the dam right here. They were concerned that that water actually coming down would, you know, have, I don't know why I'm getting ads on this thing, but you can see there's what the spillway is supposed to look like. They were concerned that was going to cut across there and actually take out the dam. So they shut it down because they didn't want it to keep flowing, and then they let the water flow over the emergency spillway right here, which actually just goes down the mountainside. And then that made them nervous too. So finally it stopped raining, and they were able to bring down the water level behind this dam enough that they could start repairs on it. And so then they went gangbusters for like 2 years to repair the spillway on this dam. You know, because if that dam was to break, I don't know, I'm just got ads popping up on a Sony case. You know, if that dam was to break, the town of Oroville would have been under about 2 feet of water within a matter of about 2 hours. Right? It's just all that water goes down there and it just is underwater. So the dams, by the way, Oroville Dam, going back to this map here, actually, I might have another map if I can get it to advance. All right, Oroville Dam, right? So this is now 2019. So by the way, 2017 was when we got the record rainfall. That's when the dam broke, right? Or the dam didn't break, the spillway broke. And then we had to repair the spillway. And then we luckily 2018-19 was kind of a dry year. And then we got into, actually, sorry, 17, 18 was kind of a dry year, and then we got into 18, 19, we got another good chunk of rain, and you can see we filled up all the lakes completely. This lake here, Oroville, is California owned, meaning the taxpayers in California purchased it. These lakes here, Shasta and Trinity, which are the other two big lakes up in the north, are actually were built with federal dollars, so they're USDR contracted dams. And so, of course, the one that breaks is the one that California owns. And it's also probably the reason why it broke is because California probably wasn't investing in proper maintenance of the facility like the federal government probably was. So we ended up with some issues there, right? Luckily, it didn't turn into a major disaster. Otherwise, you would have definitely known about it, right? But just the fact that they were able to kind of contain it and get it fixed. And there's lots of videos on YouTube if you want to see them repairing it and so forth. They have a whole timeline thing of them fixing it. It's kind of neat. But all right, and then you get down here, Salmonless Reservoir is kind of an interesting one. Salmonless Reservoir is one of the ones you can see. It's basically the only one on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley there, and it's basically a farm. I would call it a farmer reservoir, meaning it's intentionally designed for farmers to be able to utilize and so forth. Whereas a lot of these other dams, especially along the east side here, are all controlled by the Bureau or Department of Water Resources, and the farmers don't really have any say in what they do with that water. Okay. Just so you guys know, the dams are ultimately, they have three purposes. Number one is flood control, right? And they're in this order of priority. Number one is flood control. Number two is salinity management, specifically in the Delta, right? So you guys know the tides, as the ocean comes up because of tide, that means the ocean water pushes inland into where we farm and stuff in the Delta. And we need to keep that salt from getting into the water supply there because they pump that water and they irrigate with it. And you guys all know not to drink salt water, right? Because it dehydrates you. The same is true of plants. It dehydrates plants as well. So they will release water to help push those salts from the tidal influence back out into the ocean. So that the farmers that are growing in the Delta are continuing to use fresh water. So they're not putting salt water onto their crops, right? So that's the second reason then is for, first is flood control. Second is for salinity management, and then third is for irrigation purposes. And so what happens sometimes is, and farmers get really frustrated with this, right? Is that they predict that there's going to be a really wet year, and so what does the Bureau do? They release water, and then what happens? It doesn't rain, right? Because you guys know how good weathermen are, right? Right, they always know it's always going to be something, and then it's like, I'm getting to the point though, whenever they say there's like a 90% chance, I'm like, yeah, it's probably going to rain, right? But when they're like it's 50, I'm like, it's not going to happen, right? And so they have models, they make predictions, and sometimes they get it wrong, right? But what if they didn't release, and then they did get that atmospheric river that comes over that area, and now that dam is basically trying to stop water that it can't stop, right? Then you end up with flooding. And so they are usually err on the side of caution, which in some cases is detrimental to agriculture, right? Because of that. So in any case, that's what it looked like in 2019. Pretty good, right? Pretty much every reservoir is filled. We're set, right? Now, how long do you think that lasts? I mean, that's May of 2019, right? So 2020, 21, 22. So it's been 3 years, right? And of course, you saw how much rain did we get in the last 3 years? Not a whole lot, right? And so I'll show you a graph here in just a moment of kind of where we're at.
So there's no hydroelectric on any of these things.
Oh, a lot of them have it.
Okay, I figured that was one of the reasons. But
no, actually, yeah, there's a lot of them have the hydroelectric. Actually, Lake Mead is an example because it's in the news a lot lately, right? Yeah. They have 3 different intakes that they can pull into the hydroelectric generators, and they're actually now on the last intake. And if that water level continues to drop, they won't be able to generate, and you won't be able to go to Vegas, baby. Right? Because you're not going to have as much power over there. So, yeah, that one's a whole interesting deal because the water rights are split between multiple states: Arizona, California, Nevada, and Mexico. Not New Mexico, but Mexico. So we have to divert so much water down into Mexico. The Imperial Valley in California gets a very large chunk of it. And so, yeah, I keep making a really bad joke that they find 2 more bodies in that, Lake Mead, we're going to be in serious trouble. So, because that means we're getting to the part where it's deepest, right? So
Doesn't California have priority on that?
they do. Yeah, they do. So actually Arizona gets cut off. I think it was one of the initial cutoffs, and then Nevada, and then California, and then Mexico. Yeah. So in any case, here's just get an idea here. This is Orville, right? The one that was completely filled after 2019 there versus 2021, right? Same bridge there. You can see, stores a lot of water, right? But at the same time, yeah, this is one of the biggest dams that there is, by the way, Lake Orville. And I don't remember the number off the top of my head on this particular one, but it's several million acre feet of storage, right? So I think the whole Central Valley project stores about 6 million acre feet of water. Okay, and so how does that relate to the amount of water that we get in California? I'll kind of show you that too, just so you have a feeling for it.
And as a total capacity of reservoirs, how much are we not capturing during, heavy
I'll
rain?
show you some pictures of that too. Yeah. So, we in 2019, right, we were starting to get a little bit nervous. Actually, I think it was 2020. 2020, we were starting to get a little bit nervous again. We had already kind of depleted our reservoirs down, right? And so, actually, looking at here, right, this is 21. So 2019 is full, 2021, it's getting low, and we're like, oh man, we're already in trouble, right? That's only been 2 years, basically, and we've depleted that much water out of it. And then all of a sudden, at the very end of December, right? So now going into 2022, so just 10 months ago or whatever that would be, right? Man, things were looking up. We got a bunch of rainfall, right? We're at 160% of average. We're like, all right, we're going to get another good wet year. We're going to bring all these reservoirs back up. It turned into January, no water the rest of the time, right? Like we got a really good last December, and then I don't know if you guys remember around here even, right? There was like no rain in January, February, March, April. So we thought, man, we're on this trajectory. We're going to be good again. We're going to, and nothing. So, I mean, we didn't get nothing. We got quite a bit in December and then nothing. So that's a challenge. Looking at the drought monitor, between, that big storm happened in the end of December there. Right, we were looking, of course, red is bad, right? That means we're in heavy drought. And then right after that storm, you can see it alleviated a lot of the drought conditions that we had. Okay. There's one little part up here in the top of California that seems to always do really well, regardless of what's happening in the rest of the state. But unfortunately, it's not enough water to send down this way, right? So, yeah. And you can see this area is not ever in a drought, really, down here, because they get their water from Lake Mead down the Colorado River. And so they get like 3 inches a year, literally, right? But they put on 60 inches a year on average on all their crops out there. Why? Because it all comes from the Colorado River. And by the way, on that one too, there's hydroelectric generators like in multiple locations as it goes down. So their power is pretty cheap down there too, because they're generating it all with the water as it flows into the valley. So this was as of yesterday, I guess. I took this image as of yesterday, and here's where we're at. Right, you can see they actually added they didn't add them, they're just monitoring a little bit more reservoirs now, which is why there's more things on there. But you can see Shasta, right? You can see historical average versus the actual capacity. It's 33% of what it normally would be at this time. Orville is 35% of what it normally be. Trinity is 23%. Right. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the lakes here in Paso, San Antonio and Nacimiento, right? San Antonio is like 9% of capacity right now. And Lake Nacimiento is, I think, like 30% of capacity right now. So, yeah, I mean, we need rainfall everywhere is what this boils down to, right? Pretty much everything is below historical averages right now. There's still water, don't get me wrong. We could probably make it another year. But if we don't get something in the next year or so, we're really going to be needing to figure things out. Okay. So, what do you do if you're a city or a farmer or something and there's no surface water? You know what I mean by surface water? It means water on top of the ground, right? In a lake, in a river, something like that. All right. So what do you do when there's no surface water?
Well, drill.
Yeah, you drill a hole in the ground, right? And you pump it out of the ground. Okay, and so that's kind of what is offsetting these drought years too. Not only are we using the surface water to help offset the drought years, but we also pump out of the ground. And that can be a problem. I'll show you. This just to give you just a little snippet of what's going on, right? They use tree rings and so forth to figure out when drought times were in California. You can see looking back quite a ways here, right? 800 to 2000. We had several hundred years worth of drought where we got below average rainfall, and then another several hundred years worth of drought. We've been living in this time frame. This is what we're worried about right now. Just to put it in perspective, right? We're like, oh my God, we're going to die. There's no water. Could you imagine? Right now, of course, there wasn't the population in 900, right, that we have today. There wasn't all that stuff. So, you know, we do go through some drought periods here, but in the last few centuries, right, we've been pretty flush with water in California, and that may not be the case, you know. So, yeah, yeah.
What's the connection between drought conditions and the underflow of the Salinas River?
And the underflow of the Salinas River. So the Salinas River, right, goes from here basically to Monterey, right? And really, if there was if there was no Lake Nacimiento and no Lake San Antonio, there wouldn't really be a river, because those two lakes flow into the Salinas River. And of course, everybody that farms in the Salinas River is all groundwater. They have no surface water at all. They pump everything out of the ground. And so they utilize mainly Lake Nacimiento's watershed is a lot larger than San Antonio's. So they typically have it in the neighborhood of about 60 cubic feet per second. So 1 cubic foot per second, just to give you an idea here, 1 cubic foot per second is 450 gallons per minute. So if you can imagine 450 milk containers, right? Gallons of milk every minute going by, that's 1 CFS. They release 60 of those every second into the river from Lake San Antonio and Lake Nacimiento. And so partly it's for fish and partly it's for groundwater recharge. So if the drought continues and those lakes continue to drop, the Salinas River will dry up. Yeah. So and of course that also lots of cities going on the 101 North, right, rely on that as well too. So yeah, I don't mean to all be all doom and gloom here. I know that's kind of the path I'm going down, but I'm just letting you know that we we need to get some water here.
Wait, is that 25,000 gallons a second? Did I do the math there on that?
So it'd be 60 times 450.
Yeah.
So 60 times 50 would be 30,000, right?
It's around 25,000.
Yeah,
gallons
yeah,
a
that's
second.
right.
Wow.
No, gallons per minute.
Oh, minute. I'm
Gallons
sorry.
per minute, yeah.
Second.
Yeah, it's cubic feet per second, but 1 CFS is 450 gallons per minute.
Oh, per minute. I'm
Per
sorry.
minute, yeah. And maybe I said it wrong too.
No, you said it right.
What happened last time? Because like that's recorded history, I guess, like 1850 time.
Yeah, what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, what happened to the state and people?
Well, there wasn't a whole lot of people here. I mean,
800.
California barely became a state.
Yeah.
So you only had a few people living here. They went to the stream that had water in it, and it wasn't a big deal, right? I mean, yeah. All right, so let's talk now a little bit about the water budget that we have here in California, just to give you an idea of how much water we actually have to kind of answer some of your questions about, how much are we working with, right? So just to put this in perspective, there's really 3 users of water. Okay, you got the urban folks, right? They like to go skiing, and they like to go on the lake and swim, and they like to float down the river and drink beer and stuff like that, right? I mean, that's what I mean by recreation, right? They're using that water. They're not physically consuming that water, but they're using that water for a benefit. Okay. And then of course they're also consuming water, watering their lawns, right? doing laundry, flushing toilets, whatever, you know, you do at your house, right? You're consuming water as well. Then you have your environmental uses. This includes stream flows, right? As an example, I'll show you an image here, but the San Joaquin River flows north to the Delta, right? And for years, they actually had stopped it and they diverted all the water out of the river. And the river didn't flow for like 60 years. And so then what they did was they said, okay, we want this river to flow again, the San Joaquin River Restoration Project. And so then they started letting the water flow through the river again for the fish, right? And so we made a decision to use water for an environmental purpose in this particular case, which was make the river flow again and let the fish, rehabitat this stretch of the San Joaquin River that stopped flowing for decades. Okay, and then you also can talk about the salinity management. This is the part that a lot of farmers actually are frustrated with. That's the water that, for lack of a better way of saying it, is what goes under the Golden Gate Bridge and out to the ocean, right? We release a lot of water, and I'll show you a little graphic. We release a lot of water that goes under the Golden Gate Bridge out to the ocean that a lot of farmers would say, hey, if you stop that, we could actually kind of get out of this drought thing, right? But of course, they're doing it for salinity management type purposes. They're also doing it for the Delta smelt. Anybody heard about the Delta smelt? All right, I'll show you a picture. It's a minnow. It's about this big. It fits in the palm of your hand. And it's one of the few species that is considered to be native to the Delta. And it's in decline. And so they assume, environmental folks assume that if the fish is in decline, that means that the ecosystem in the Delta is also in decline. Whether that is a true indication or not, we could debate all day, every day, right? But that's what the environmental groups that are fighting for the Delta smelt are arguing. Okay? And by the way, they're winning too. So there's legal, you have judge smacking a gavel saying you have to turn off the pumps that pump the water out of the Delta into the California aqueduct, because ultimately that's what happens. Let me just explain that a little bit. Water comes out of the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River. Not a whole lot of the San Joaquin River, but comes out of the Sacramento River, goes into the Delta, right? That's pushing the salt water out to the ocean again, like we were talking about. They have a couple pumps there, big pumps, that pump the water out of the Delta and put them in the California aqueduct, and the California aqueduct works its way all the way down almost to San Diego, to Corona, Menifee area down south, okay? And in the process of doing that, when they turn on those pumps, sometimes it reverses tidal flows. Like, you expect the water to be going out to the ocean, but they're pumping so much that it actually is pulling the water from the ocean towards the pumps. So now the fish get confused. They think they're swimming upstream to fresh water, and they're actually swimming upstream to salt water, right? And so when we get to these times, whenever we're short on water and stuff, the judge literally has slapped the gavel and said, stop pumping, because the Delta smelt are in danger. And if you even, and by the way, when they swim, they can swim into the pump too. And then, it's like a blender, and then the Delta smelt's dead, right? And so, and it's an endangered species. And I don't know if you guys know what the Endangered Species Act says. It says you do everything and anything to protect it from dying, right? And so that's what we're doing, is we're trying to protect it. Okay. And then of course you have the ag folks here that also consume water. And we also have argument between ag groups, right? Oh, Mark Twain said whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over, right? And that's kind of true, because as you guys saw on the graphs I showed you earlier, where does most of the water fall in California? In the north. And where do we produce a lot of food and fiber? In the south, right? And so that means the water has to move from the north to the south. And so the farmers in the south are saying, please send water down this way. And the farmers in the north are saying, no way, that's our water, right? And of course, when it's drought years, the farmers in the south are really asking for water, but the farmers in the north are like, well, you should have farmed in the north, dummy, kind of thing. So there ends up being some competition between the north and the south as well, which, but now with water rights and all this other stuff, they can actually transfer water down. But usually those farmers can't afford that kind of water. But who can afford that water in the south?
municipalities.
That's right. LA can afford that water. And so they'll gladly pay. By the way, water typically when you pump it out of the ground, I'm going to make nice round numbers here, is around $100 an acre foot. Okay. An acre foot of water is, if you can picture a football field 1 foot deep, that would be an acre foot of water. It's 1 acre of land 1 foot deep. And to give you another perspective, that's 325,829 gallons. Okay.
Say that again. What was it?
1 acre foot is 325,829 gallons, which is technically enough to support a family of 4 for a year, right? You know, with all the things that they would do with that water.
It's $100 for it.
And they would pay $100 for it. Okay. Now, Imperial Valley, which gets their water from the Colorado River, and by the way, it generates electricity the whole way down. So that water has already added value one way or another, right? They pay in the neighborhood of like 20 to 25 bucks an acre foot down there, right? You get onto some of these areas like Westland's Water District, which is just right over here. If you were to ever drive the 41 to In-N-Out Burger on the 5, you know what I'm talking about, right over there, right? Kettleman City, yeah, yep, that's right. You get right over there, that's Westland's Water District, and they will pay. They can't even get water. Let's just put it that way. So some of those farmers that are trying to irrigate in those areas will pay, you know, up to $1,000 an acre foot, right? Now you get into municipalities and they will pay a lot more than that. In fact, if you think about it, how much do you pay for water every month?
Right.
My water bill last month was like $200+, right? Yeah.
City of Paso Robles, a gallon of fresh water delivered to your kitchen sink is less than a penny
Per gallon.
per gallon.
Per gallon. All right. So now you multiply that by 325,829.
Right. But that also includes transportation fee.
For sure. Yep. Yeah. So it is relatively inexpensive, but it's still a lot more money than a farmer is willing to pay to grow a crop. Right. Why? Because they know if they use $1,000 an acre foot water, they're going to need to charge 5-6 times as much as they are right now to the, you know, to the end user. And so your guys' prices just go up. Right.
So that's be the right crop at that point.
That's correct. So then you have to rotate crops, you know, and economics plays a role. Well, then alfalfa goes out the window, right? And alfalfa can't go out the window. Why? Because what is alfalfa primarily used for? Cows. So beef and milk and cheese and all that stuff is going to skyrocket if they get rid of you know, forage crops like alfalfa. All right, so there's all of these factors at play. Water can get very, very expensive whenever you're moving water from the north to somewhere in the south, but typically people at municipalities are willing to pay that price, right? And in fact, you guys probably heard a little bit about desal too, right? Carlsbad has one of the biggest desal plants.
Yeah, what does that cost?
So the technology is not really there yet, and my understanding is it's in the neighborhood of about $1,500 an acre foot to produce. You know, so it's expensive. But again, if you take 200 times 12, right? I'm paying $2,400 a year in water, and that's about an acre foot. So as a consumer in my house, I'm willing to pay $2,400 a year for water to get 1 acre foot. The farmer's not, right? If they want to stay in business, or they have to switch to some high value crop, right? And so, so desal does work now. Desal has whole other issues, like it's super energy intensive, which means what? You have to have the grid to support it. And I don't know, they're just telling everybody not to charge their Teslas, you know, a couple weeks ago, right? Did you guys get the text message? Right? And make sure you turn off your TV. I'm like, seriously, turn off my TV, right? So, you know, how are we going to support desalinization and also have everybody driving electric cars and everybody's air conditioners on? It's just, it's going to be very, very challenging. Okay. So, yeah, that's, and then we didn't even talk about the byproduct that is produced from desal, which is, you know, brine. Brine is super salty water. What do you do with the super salty water that you just produced? Right now, they just put it back in the ocean. By the way, if they were water dischargers, which it sounds like you might be, you know, you're not allowed to do that. So the problem is that super salty water kind of goes to the bottom, settles out in the coral reef, and then kills it. And so they have to disperse of it and all kinds of stuff, and which of course takes more energy. right? So everybody says, look at all that water over there, just desal. Yeah, we could, but we better also be putting in nuclear plants or something else to offset all of it, right? So, in any case, speaking of this real quickly, urban, environmental, and agriculture, I kind of think of this like a three-legged stool. You kind of need all three of them, right, in order for the whole thing to kind of stand up and work. But if you think about these three groups, which of these three groups has the money? Urban folks have the money, right? They're willing to spend some money to take a nice shower, you know, and swim in a pool and whatever else they want to do.
But they want to eat too.
But they also want to eat, you know, that's definitely true. That's why I'm saying it's three-legged stool. They need each other, right? So they have some money. Which one of these three groups has the water right? Ag has the water right, right? Up until a point. Which one of these three groups has the vote? Well, the urban folks vote, but what are they voting for?
Environmental.
Typically, if you said, and I don't mean to sound bad right now, right? But if you put something on that says save babies or save fish, guess what people do? Well, they vote for them, right? They want to save babies and they want to save fish. They really do, right? And I mean, don't we all, right? We don't want to see a species die off or whatever, right? We want to protect what we have. And so typically environmental groups will go in and they will say, we want to save the fish. Do you vote to save the fish? Yes or no, right? And if you say no, you're, you know, and so of course you vote for it, right? You vote for these environmental things. Now, who does that impact? Of course, typically it's the urban folks because they're the densely populated areas that are voting for these. Who does that impact though? Absolutely it does, right? Because now ag was used to getting so much water and now they're not getting that amount of water, even though they have the water right, because environmental regulation overrules their water right.
Is ag lobbying against
Oh
that?
man, they're trying like crazy. Yeah, they're trying hard, but of course, when the Endangered Species Act kicks in, or whenever you vote that we're going to do something with water, the only source to get it from is the folks that have it, and so this makes it challenging then for the farmers. Yeah. So just to give you an idea here, this is Jerry Brown before he left office, but this is kind of what he would say. He would say, hey, about 50% of the water in California is used for the environment. I'm going to dive into these numbers a little bit and show you kind of how they play a numbers game with the numbers. Okay, but they say 50% of the water is used by the environment, 40% is used by ag, and 10% is used by urban. In fact, if you've ever driven up the 5 freeway, you probably saw a little pie chart or something, and it looks something like this. And they basically are saying the same thing, right? Urban uses 10%, ag uses 40%, environment uses 50%. This is these are the actual numbers here on an average year, right? So all they do is round them, right? 10, 40, 50, because people can remember that. But in reality, it's 11, 41, and 48% on an average year. So you will always hear things though, like ag uses all the water. What number have you guys heard? How much water does ag use?
70%.
Yeah, 80% is usually the number everybody throws around. Ag uses 80% of the water. I'm going to show you how they come up with that number. But the reality of it is that these numbers aren't even right either. This is the number that farmers like to use, and I would argue that these aren't the numbers either. Okay, and I'll show you why that is. But ultimately, the media, let's put it that way, the number they like to use is ag uses 80% of the water. Okay, and let's kind of dive into that. Actually, I will get into that, but let me just show you real quickly. This is a little video. I didn't produce this video, a meteorologist produced this video, Brian here. But basically, this kind of shows precipitation from January 1st to the December 31st. And I want you to see, I want you to just compare the East Coast as you watch this, compare the East Coast compared to the West Coast. So right now you can see in January, right, the West Coast is getting quite a bit of rainfall, right, in January 1st. But most of it is in Northern California, right? Southern California, in fact, down here at the base of Southern California is dry. That's what I was saying before, right? They don't get any rainfall down there. But what you'll notice is that as we move into the, you guys have probably traveled around the states, right? But when you go back to Florida, for example, in in August, what happens like every other day? It rains, right? Really humid, you get thunderstorms that roll through and stuff. So while we go into summer, this all turns brown, right? And then this all turns green, right? And so you'll notice this line right here is kind of, it kind of just shifts over a little bit and then it shifts back, right? This area is always getting rainfall. This one gets a little bit of rainfall in the winter months and then it's basically brown, right? And that's, if you guys have been to Hawaii too, it's the same as true, right? You can go to the east side of the main island over in Hilo, and it's tropical rainforest, right? Then you can go over to the Kona Brewing, and it's like a desert, right? And it's within a few miles of each other. This is just a big island, kind of always dry on this side and always wet on that side. And of course, we chose to live over here, right? Or we were born over here, either way. But so let's just play this for you here, hopefully. So you can just watch, you see the days are counting, right? And you can see that as we're starting to get wetter here in February, March, now we're starting to dry up over there on the east side, or the west side, I mean. We get really dry down here in the Arizona, California area. Now we're into the middle of summer, or getting to the middle of summer, you can see it's just really, really dry. And over here now it's really wet, right? And then you'll notice that as we start to move back towards the winter again, this line kind of shifts back over. And then we start to get some rainfall again over there, right? They're always getting water, and we're only getting it a few months out of the year. Okay, so that's kind of you know, how it works here. Now, just to put this in perspective, I think it's playing again. I gotta just advance it here, hopefully. Just to put this in perspective, this is the Mississippi River, right? This is 650,000 CFS. Right. Remember, I was saying that we release about 60 CFS into the Salinas River. Right. So this is only what, 1,000 times more. Actually, more than that, a lot more than that. But you can see the watershed that all flows into the Mississippi River. If you ever cross the Mississippi River down here, you're like on a bridge for miles. Right. That's how wide it is. Okay. Here's the mighty Sacramento River. And then there's the mighty San Joaquin River right there below it, you know, like we don't really get a whole lot of water here. Okay. You have the Snake River, the Columbia River up in Washington, pretty good size. And there's obviously been talk about putting some kind of pipeline from there down to here. Right. But good luck with that. I mean, seriously. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Or the, you know, hey, let's just go this direction for 5,000 miles or whatever that is. Yeah, sure. Right. Could you imagine a pipe like, you know, I don't care how big it is for 5,000 miles, you know, it's just, you're not going to get any water out of it. Right. But, and the cost, the energy cost and everything to get that water all the way over here just wouldn't be feasible. This might be somewhat feasible, maybe, but just it's not going to happen. States can't agree to, you know, they have their own water issues, I guess. But okay. So this is what we're working with. Right. So now let's compare that then to how much water we have. Okay. So when you look at it, right, precipitation falling in California. How am I doing on time? I don't even know where I'm at. I'm
9:53.
Okay.
So 40 minutes.
Perfect. All right. So this is on an average year again, right? We always look at average years. And by the way, you know how often average hits? Like once every 100 years, something like that, right? Like it never hit. We're either above it or below it, right? And I showed you some graphs, right? We had a couple of years that were pretty well above, and then we had some years that were, the last few years were all below, right? But on average year, we get about 205 million acre feet. Okay. And then we also get some inflow from Oregon, a little bit at the top. And then we get some actually that flows back up from Mexico. And by the way, you don't want to use that water. It's the Alamo and the New Mexico rivers, and they are contaminated, you know, discharging, you know, for lack of, yeah, there you go. Thank you. I couldn't come up with a good word other than shit. Into the rivers, you know. And then we also have the Colorado River, which actually is a pretty good chunk of that is coming out of the Colorado River and ultimately into the Imperial Valley down south. So in total, we have about 211 million acre feet landing in the state every year. Okay. And then, but we utilize 213.5 million acre feet, which means we're overdrafting the ground by about 3 million acre feet every year. Okay. And you might say, well, why are we using more? Well, we have water going out to the ocean, right? We're physically consuming it to grow plants. We're utilizing it for, urban areas and all that. And so ultimately, a lot of this groundwater overdraft is from agriculture. There's no doubt, right? Because these farms are in areas where they don't get a whole lot of rainfall. We're no longer diverting the water to them anymore because we've made a decision, to send that water to the ocean to protect the Delta smelt. And so these farmers basically then go and they rely on groundwater. Now, I would also tell you that this has been going on for decades. It's not just because of the Delta smelt. They've been in certain areas overdrafting groundwater quite a bit.
Is there a trend here in terms of water consumption?
Maybe.
Water leaving the region, or I mean, you say average, has it always been around 213, let's say, over the last 20 years?
Yeah,
or is it
correct.
increasing?
No, in fact, it's probably decreasing a little bit, leaving the region, but the water entering the region is probably also decreasing a little bit on average too.
Okay.
So
Right.
these are all average numbers, of course. And
Yeah.
I have wet years and dry year type numbers, but I'm just using the average just to give you an idea.
Okay.
So yeah, on average. So some years we don't deplete the groundwater, right? Because it's a really wet year. And by the way, it's a double whammy because when it's drought, what do plants need? They need even more water because there's no cloud cover, so they're hotter, right? Just like you would in the sun, you would need to drink more water, right? Whereas when it's raining and cloudy, you don't need as much water. The plants don't either. So it's kind of a double whammy. When it's raining, we don't need the water, right? But then whenever it's hot, we need more water. And so it kind of exaggerates. When it's wet years, we probably aren't overdrafting at all. And when it's really dry years, we're probably overdrafting by a lot. But on average, we're overdrafting by about 3 million acre feet a year. And just graphically, what that means is that California, Imperial Valley, San Joaquin Valley, Sacramento Valley, those valleys are using up to 150% of the water that they get in these regions. You'll notice that over here on the East Coast, right? They use less than 75% of the rainfall. Most of that water ends up going to the ocean through the Mississippi or whatever. They don't even need it, right? Because it's always raining over there. But over here, we have that mighty Sacramento River, right? That's trying to feed the world here. And we end up using 150% of the amount of water that we have in that particular region there. This is a problem. This is the overdrafting piece, right? And what does the overdrafting lead to? Does anybody know? Subsidence. That's right. So here's a couple examples of subsidence. This is a canal, right? You can see the canal liner. The canal literally has sunk in certain areas because the ground below it is shrinking. And so now you have water flowing in a canal that's breaching the side of the canal lining because the canal physically is going up and down dips because the ground is sinking, right? This is Dr. Poland. He was with USGS for a long time. And based on his estimations here, he said the ground surface was up there in 1925, and in 1977, it was down there. So it dropped like 10 meters in that, whatever that is, 50 years, right? And we've kind of been able to slow the subsidence a little bit. At first, when everybody moved out here, right, and they realized that, literally in some areas, they would dig a hole in the ground and it was artesian well, water just coming out of it, right? Because we had so much of it because nobody ever used it, right? And so they're like, oh, plenty of water. Ground is fertile, let's grow. And then we learned pumps, right? We figured out how to do pumping, and then boom, we started pumping, and nobody really was paying attention to the fact that we were actually causing damage in terms of subsidence, right? And unfortunately, once the ground subsides, there's no fluffing it back up, right? Once you lose, and by the way, that was all capacity that we could store with water in, that is now gone. So subsidence is still occurring today. You get into the Mendota area and they still say it's dropping like an inch or up to 4 inches a year or something like that. It's constantly dropping. So, it's things that we need to work on. So this is just to give you an idea here, right? This is the watershed. So this blue line that goes all the way around is the watershed, and all that water ends up in the Delta, right? So all that snowpack here along the Sierra that I was showing you pictures of before, it all flows down into the valley, into the San Joaquin River, which comes up here, and then into the Sacramento, which comes here. Our Delta is unique to the world. Our Delta is inverted. Most deltas have a single outlet, and then it fans out as it goes out into the ocean, right, with multiple islands and so forth. Ours is inverted. We have all these islands and so forth that come to one point at the bay and then go out into the ocean. So we're kind of a unique deal, and that's kind of why a lot of people are trying to protect it too, right, is because it is unique. It's interesting though how times have changed. In the 20s, I think it was Coolidge, the president, and he's like, hey, go out there, that's swampland, right? Turn that swampland into fertile ground and you guys can farm it, right? And there's stories, you know, whether they're 100% accurate or no, I don't know, but there's stories about how you had to mark off your land from a boat, right? Because it was all underwater. And so you would basically go out there and it wasn't super deep, you know, and you'd flag it. You'd say, I'm going to farm this land, right, underwater. And so they had to build all the levee systems and stuff that they have in the Delta now. So they would flag it off, they would build banks, they would make the water flow around their land, and then they would start farming it. And that's kind of how the Delta, yeah.
Well, at that time, the chart you showed with it, that those are very wet years.
Yeah, that's correct.
So
Yeah.
probably was a lot of water.
There was, yeah, definitely. And then the dams weren't built just yet, right, and all that stuff. And so there wasn't the flood control that we have. You know, a lot of the dams were built in the 50s and 60s, right? And so there's a story in the Los Banos area where Henry Miller actually said, okay, I want all this land, but it wasn't underwater. So he put wagon wheels under a boat because the rule was you had to flag it from a boat. And he just drove around this big area and just was flagging off all this property from a boat. And he ended up with this big area of land that actually was already farmable, but nobody had claimed because anyway, whether or not that's 100% accurate, I don't know, but that's the story, you know, and I can believe it too, right? You get creative whenever you're like, oh, I can just have this land, but I need a flagger from a boat. Got it. So any case, you can see here's the little piece from Oregon that we get a little bit of water from up here, right? And so that's included in there. You can see there's Lake Shasta again. The Sacramento River basically starts at Lake Shasta, right? So that's where a lot of the releases into the Sacramento River come from. A lot of people are anti-dams, you know, because for fish reasons and so forth. But I'm kind of the opinion that without those dams in the drought years, there wouldn't be a Sacramento River. And so the fishing industry and all that is actually kind of being propped up by the dam. So I don't think it's the fish folks that are really don't like the dams, the fishermen, I guess, but some of the environmental groups don't want to see dams, right? They want to take them out. So that's kind of a challenge. So in any case, all this water from the north ends up here at the Delta. All this water from the south kind of ends up in the Delta. And so this is why the Delta is a hot topic, because you have two rivers kind of converging and then going out into the ocean. And of course, this is also where we have that salt water, you know, meshing with the fresh water there. So they release certain amounts of water. Here's Lake Oroville down here, right? They release certain amounts of water to keep that that delta salinity, keep the salinity under control. It's not like it's salinity free, right? You're always going to have some salinity there. But, and then we pump out of that, and we put it in the California aqueduct, which comes all the way down to about here. Okay. So delta is important, right? And we were talking a little bit, this is just a kind of satellite image of the delta. You can see all of the levee systems and everything, and then the two rivers kind of coming together and going out into the bay there. Yeah, so lots of lots of farmland in here, supreme soil, but they also have subsidence, believe it or not. Their subsidence is not happening because the land is shrinking. It's happening because their land is so fertile that as they farm it, it like basically volatilizes and just goes away. And so now they would build a levee and they would farm here, and the water was, you know, here, right? And now their ground is down here and the water's still here. So now you have a, you know, gopher as an example, right? That kind of starts digging through, and then boom, it breaks the levee, and now their ground is flooded and the levee's broke, and now the river's going through their property, right? And so now what do you do? Right? Is it the farmer's responsibility to fix the levee? Is it the state's responsibility? You know, who's going to fix this thing? And of course, this is now where farmers and the state argue over, well, it's your levee, you should fix it. There's other people that are saying once levees break, they should just let it go back to native, which is marshland, right? And so I'm just telling you all sides of the story. I'm not trying to tell you necessarily how I think it should be, but these are the arguments that we're having, right, between the farmers and the you know, the environmental groups and the urban groups too. So just to give you an idea here, so this is a Central Valley project. This is federally funded. Most of this was intended for water allocation to growers. Okay, and so you can see over here, this is 6 million acre feet a year, right? There's 5 million acre feet. This graph only goes to about 2013 or 2014 here, 2014, I guess. I was trying to find a newer one, but this is the one I could come up with. But what you'll see here is this is the outflow from the reservoirs, right? From the Central Valley Project reservoir. So this is Trinity and Shasta in particular, is how much water they have coming out of them on an annual basis. And this is the allocation that the farmers were getting. This is on this side, they were getting 100% of their water. 1993, the Delta Smelt and the Endangered Species Act, right? Basically saying do everything and everything, anything and everything to protect it. When that happened, they started saying, okay, well, you're not going to be able to use as much water. They're still releasing, if you look at this, they're still releasing basically the same amount of water every year into the river, right? But now the farmers are only allowed to pump, if you kind of look at all of these, you know, shotgun pattern, maybe about half of it on average, right? And then there's some years where they got zero allocation. They were not allowed to use any surface water, right? Even though look at how much water's coming out. They were not allowed to use it. Where'd all that water go then? Yeah, into the Delta and ultimately to the ocean, right? In the name of protecting the Delta smelt. So this is now where I was talking about before, right? Is the farmers have the water right, but there's a regulation now that's basically overruling them and saying, no, we're going to use it for other things. So they're pumping all this water out to the ocean. What do you expect to happen to the Delta smelt?
Increases in population.
Yeah, heck yeah, right? Actually, it's this chart. Increases in population. Here's what's happened to the Delta smelt when they started releasing all the water to the ocean. Look how many they found in 2018. It's not working. Based on what the data says, it's not working, right? And why is that? Well, the reason why I think is because of the locations they look. They historically go look in the Delta in certain locations for the smelt. Okay. And so I was reading an article one time and it's like no smelt found in the Delta for the first time. I'm like, oh shit, well, that's a problem, right? And then you continue to read the article and, you know, it sounds like doomsday stuff. And then at the very end of the article, it says, oh, by the way, they didn't find them in the locations that they normally look, but we know they're in other locations. I'm like, but your title says there's no Delta smelt out in the river, right? That's a problem. So the bottom line is where they look, they have certain locations. The habitat has probably changed, right? A lot of it used to be marshy, you know, there would be rocks that the fish could swim into and hide from predators and all this other stuff. Well, as we continue to use the levees, they end up like rip-wrapping them and making them to where the water can flow easily through it. And it gives the fish like nowhere to really hide and so forth. So I think this has less to do with how much water is flowing through the Delta and more to do with the habitat that's actually in the Delta. But of course, they claim that this fish is an indicator of the habitat, right? And I guess in a way it is, but which one is driving which is my question, right? So that's just something to think about there. So going back here just a little bit, you can see outflows through the Delta. This is just water going through the Delta. The first one was being released from reservoirs. This is actually going out to the Delta, and you can see all the way through 21, right? It changes every year. It changes. Okay. Exports basically are water that's being moved like into the Bay Area here, right? They're basically moving water out of the Delta and sending it to San Francisco. So you can see as San Francisco grows, right? They're getting more and more water, right? They're still getting theirs. And then in Delta use is basically those farmers that are farming in the Delta. And you'll notice, look at that, how that green bar, what is it basically every year in terms of its height? Can you see the colors? I don't know. It's basically about the same. Why? Because there's the same number of acres, the same number of farmers, right? They're using about the same amount of water every year, whether it was 1920 or 2021, right? But the San Francisco is getting more and the other municipalities are getting more. The outflows, right, are changing all the time. right? And then your upstream uses are like farmers say in the Sacramento Valley, right? You can see, and what are those numbers? They grew a little bit there, probably because we needed to produce more, and then they've kind of been relatively flat for a lot of years.
Yeah.
So ag is basically using roughly the same amount of water over the years. Urban folks are getting more, and then the environmental use is always varies, right? Basically is what, because that's the outflow, right? And wouldn't it be nice that when you have one of these wet years here, like that 2017 year, that we had some more storage so we didn't, because obviously these outflows here are kind of doing it for the smelt, are they not? So does that much outflow really help the smelt whenever it seems like that much outflow is doing it? So could we take this water and store it? That's the argument that the ag folks are making right now, right?
What were I noticed spikes in the smelt population, were they related to outflows at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you were to kind of correlate this, like let's look here back at, go back this way, right? So it looks like in the late 90s, right? We had some spikes. So looking back here at the late 90s, yeah, maybe. And so initially they're like, oh, maybe it does work, give them more water, but it doesn't seem to be working today. But we're a kind of we have a hammer, let's use it, right? There's no other tools in our toolbox. And so we continue to send water to the ocean, and farmers are kind of drying up, so to speak. But we don't have any other options. Well, we do have some options. I'll go through those here in just a moment. So NASA has this GRACE program where basically they say that through satellite imaging, they can give an idea of how the groundwater level is doing, right? And so you can see 2002 groundwater levels are decent. 2008, it's starting to dry up. 2014, it's really dry. And if you were to look today, it'd be really dry, right? And so what is driving this? My opinion on what is driving this is our regulation. We said we have to do in 1993, we have to basically do everything to protect the smelt. So where's all the water going? To the ocean. So what are all these farmers doing then in order to continue to stay in business and give us almonds or whatever else we want to do? They're pumping. And so this is, lack of a better way of saying it, this is kind of a man-made issue that we've got here, right? There are a lot of people that are of the mindset that if somehow we were able to magically change who the governor is, right, and get some people in there that have different perspectives, that we could change the issues that we're having with groundwater right now, because some of that water could be going to these areas and be utilizing surface water rather than utilizing groundwater. Would it actually fix the problem? I have no idea, right? But
How would we capture that extra water though?
that's where I'm going to get to. Yeah. So in any case, we have a whole bunch of series of canals, and the California Aqueduct's one of them, right? We have all these different parts and pieces here, all these different projects. Some are state projects, meaning funded by the state. Some of them are federal, funded by everybody in the United States, and some of them are local. A lot of the local ones are like San Diego, right? They want their share of the Colorado River, so they put in their own. San Francisco wants their share, so they put in a Hetchy, right? LA wanted their share from, well, there's nothing left up there, but they wanted it coming down here, so the Los Angeles Aqueduct. So the people that live in those cities were getting that water. But a lot of these projects are all built by the federal government. And why would the federal government put dollars into our systems? That's right. They benefit from it, right? If you want lettuce in Minnesota in December, it comes from either Salinas or the Imperial Valley, right? I mean, it's not coming from Minnesota. It's frozen there, unless they put in a greenhouse or something, right? But that's kind of the idea. So these projects have been very good in terms of getting water where we need it. But now the problem is that we're fighting over where the water goes, right? So just to give you an idea, about 80 million acre feet of water is used for the three uses there: urban, ag, and environment. Okay, about 80 million acre feet is used. How much did we say comes into California? 210, 200 plus the 5, it's about 215 or something like that, right? And only about 80 of it is actually used by us. Where does all the rest of it go?
Through the Delta?
Actually, some of this goes through the delta as well. That's the environmental piece.
Okay.
Yeah, some of it does go through the delta, but ultimately, when it rains, what happens to everybody? What happens to the hills around here? They turn green. A lot of the water is consumed before we can even use it ourselves, right? So a huge chunk of the water, in fact, out of the 211 or whatever, right? Minus the 80, that's how much of it is used by the environment before it even comes into our area. So I refer to this as the developed water. This is water that ends up in rivers and reservoirs and lakes that we can use. Okay. And so this is where the 10, right? Because see, that's 8 of 80 is about 10%. So that's 10, 40, and 50% roughly come from is these numbers right here. Okay. However, if you break this down a little bit, remember we have that 200 million plus acre feet. It comes, if you break this out as a pie chart, about 60% of it or so is utilized by the environment before we can do anything with it, right? The grass turns green. The trees, and you guys been to the redwoods or the sequoias, freaking magnificent, right? Why? Because of rainfall. So we can't use this, that's undeveloped. We can use the developed water though, about 80 million. Okay. So then you break that off and you look at now just the developed water. Here's where the 50, the 40, and the 10 come from. Does that make sense? So this is what the farmer shows, that pie chart the farmer shows as you're driving down the 5 freeway is this piece. They're already saying, let's ignore that because we can't do anything with that water anyways. It goes right into the ground, the plant uses it, we're done. Can't do anything. So let's focus on this piece, the water that's in rivers, lakes, whatever. Now, what the media does is you see this 50% that's used by environment, they slice that off too. So they slice this off and they slice that off, and you're left with basically this amount of water here. The 35 and the, let's call it 10. So you're looking at 45 million acre feet. This is now when they say ag uses 80% of the water because they're ignoring all environmental uses and they just focus on what's being used by humans. And they say ag uses 80% of it. That's a problem. Because really, if you look at it, if you look at all the water that lands, ag uses 35 million acre feet out of 2 million acre feet. They're only using about 17% of the water in California. But if you're not aware of this and you hear it on the news that ag uses 80% of the water, what are you assuming? That ag is the problem. When in reality, ag is not the problem, right? Ag may have some of the solutions, but they're not the problem. And then you go to Chipotle and you get a cup. And what does it say? 80% of the water consumed in the US is used for agriculture. Is it? Depending on how you cook the numbers, right? It's my favorite thing about politics is you can cook numbers to say whatever you want to say, right? I don't care what side you're on.
How does Chipotle get their produce?
Yeah, that's right. And that's what they're trying to say. And if you read down here, and then it says we use technologies like drip irrigation, saving the world, right? And it's like, does it? In fact, I can show you lots of studies that show if you use drip irrigation, you actually use more water. But guess what else you get? More yield. Is that a good trade-off? But are you conserving water? I thought the idea was to conserve water, not to get more yield. Dang it, it gets complicated, doesn't it?
Depends on how you run the numbers.
That's right.
Like X amount of pounds of produce per gallon
Drop.
of water.
Yeah, that's
drop.
actually how Jane Irrigation talked about it. More crop per drop.
Yeah.
So every drop that they put on, they get a little bit more yield. But ultimately, the problem is we don't have the water to begin with. So what we need to do is shrink the yield to shrink the consumption. And switching to drip doesn't do that. Although everybody in the news, what do they say? Switch to drip. Why? Because drip people have money to tell you to go buy drip. And by the way, I sell drip stuff. Right? But in reality, what we need to do is we need to just consume less. But the problem is that the markets are good in certain commodities and we want more yield. And so you get more yield by typically putting on more water. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about now some of the federal and state solutions. How am I doing on time?
10 minutes.
Oh man, okay. That's okay. We're gonna be good here. So one of the solutions here is CAIS reservoir. This is, so by the way, the first few that I'm going to show you, all of them that kind of look like this are all federal ideas. This is the Bureau of Reclamation coming in and saying we have ideas, right? This is Sites Reservoir. This is up near Calusa area. And they're saying, hey, we can store basically another 1.5 million acre feet of water up here if we just put a dam in this location. Right. I don't know if you guys know this, but there hasn't been a new dam in like forever. Right. And so they're pushing on this. They're hoping that within the next 10 years, we can actually get this dam built. There's been 3 or 4 dams that have come out in the last 10 years, but we're hoping to put a new dam in. Okay. So that's one of their options. Another option is Folsom Dam. They want to raise it. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I want to say it was like 15 feet or something, which will give them another chunk of storage. I don't know if it says in here. But yeah, they want to raise it to try to build more storage behind Folsom Dam. It also will provide more flood protection, right? Which is kind of another thing that they're after. Los Vaqueros Reservoir, they also want to expand it. Expanding it will give it, I think, another 115,000 acre feet. So not, I mean, we're talking about millions of acre feet on the other charts, right? So, but it's something. Okay, so they want to expand that reservoir. By the way, these are all supposedly, the Bureau is pretty confident that these are going to happen. It's not going to happen next year, of course, but in the next 10 to say 20 years, they're pretty confident that these will happen. There's another reservoir expansion that they're talking about doing. This one's at the base of San Luis Reservoir. So there's kind of this forebay and then there's San Luis Reservoir, and they want to build up. So what they do with San Luis Reservoir, remember that's the one that I said was on the west coast, the farmers kind of control. When there's extra water, they actually pump it up into that reservoir and they store it there. And there's lots of stories about how that one in dry times, they're actually trying to take the government was trying to take water out of the reservoir for the fish, and the farmers are, whoa, time out. That is our water, right? We paid to store that water there. You guys can't just have access to it. And so they got lawyers involved and kind of shut it down. But, you know, they're trying to build more storage there near San Luis Reservoir as well. And then there's proposal for another El Puerto reservoir, putting in, this is a rendering, of course, right? Putting in another dam here. You can see this year they got $15 million just to do permitting and engineering. So it's not like we're talking about, you know, these things are cheap to build, right? Of course, the California, the DWR solutions. See, the federal solutions were a little bit more like engineering based, like let's add some storage, let's do some infrastructure improvements, right? California is like, let's do climate change adoption, everybody. Okay, like let's, you know, whatever that means, right? Let's support California's regions, whatever that means, right? Let's strengthen water equity. I don't know how those solve the problems, but that's what California is, of course, working on there. And then, of course, they have the tunnel system. And by the way, the tunnel system is to drill underneath the delta, put a big pipeline in underneath the delta that diverts water past the delta. So that way we're protecting the delta smelt. And then then it goes down south through the California aqueduct. So if you guys want a little bit of information about that, you can like open up your phone to the camera and scan the QR code, and it goes to the link that that is open for public comment. So if you guys are interested in providing comment on California's plan to put in a tunnel system, you're more than welcome to you know, give it a go. So is it the right solution? I don't know. They're saying it's going to be like $15 billion and it won't be done for like 30 years or something like that. So, you know, we might not even have agriculture in California by then. I don't know. I know I'm being pessimistic right now, but
Not the cheapest solution.
no, it's definitely not, right? Building a reservoir is going to be a little bit cheaper than drilling a tunnel for multiple miles, 37 miles, right? Underneath the delta.
Maybe Musk can use it for the
For the train. That would be cool. Like the train's in the water and like you're swimming, maybe. And then impacted water basins. Let's just kind of talk about this real quickly. So this is obviously the San Joaquin Valley here, and you can see basically I don't know if you guys heard of SGMA. SGMA is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It was passed I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. I don't remember the exact date, but basically it gives the state of California until 2040 to implement a plan to become sustainable. The way the plan is set up is that there is GSAs, groundwater sustainability agencies, that have to basically figure out how much water do we get in our little basin and how much water can we consume from our little basin. Based on this map, by the way, this map is from the ITRC, the Irrigation Training and Research Center, which is at Cal Poly. I used to work for the ITRC before I moved over to Laurel. Dan Howes, Dr. Dan Howes there does all these maps, and he's really good. He has a program called Metric that you're welcome to. I'll have another little link you can look at there. But basically what this is saying is that if you're level 1 sustainable, it means you're not going to have a problem. You have enough water to sustain what you're doing today. If you're gray, you're level 2 sustainable, it means you're pretty darn close. And then everything else means that you've got problems, right? Red is bad. And look at a large chunk of the San Joaquin Valley here has got red. They're not sustainable. That means that you've got a lot of farmers that are farming in these red areas. They're going to be kind of in trouble. So you got options, right? What are your options? Well, maybe what you do is you just reduce the number of acres that you grow, right? Instead of growing 100 acres, you grow 50 acres, and that can make you sustainable in terms of water. It may not make you sustainable in terms of economics, but that is one option, right? So this is just a kind of a little blow up of northern central California here. You can see this is a part of the exchange contractors right here. This actually right here in this area is where I was talking about the guy with the wagon, or in the boat on the wagon. That's why they have really good water rights in this area. Is they exchange their water from the San Joaquin River for water from the north, so that the San Joaquin River can be diverted south to Bakersfield. And so because of that exchange in water, they got really strong water rights. So you got some areas that are doing really well, other areas, sorry. And then you get into the, Hanford down into Bakersfield, and it's kind of all bad, right? They don't have the water to sustain what they're doing today. All right, and then here's the Paso Robles Basin, just to give you an idea. This is also images from ITRC. You can see you've got, this is the river, the Salinas River here. So of course it's got high water use because it's got a lot of vegetation in there that's consuming water, right? But then you have a lot of grapevines out here that aren't using a whole lot, but then you have some hot spots here, right? And those hot spots are probably like alfalfa crops that are being grown still here locally. And so the big problem that they have, this is another image just so you can see kind of where they're growing. I know I'm kind of running out of time here. So here's the biggest problem, right? Is they have a net sustainable ET of about 39,000 acre feet. And we have 436,000 acres to farm. So if you were to take that and spread it out, basically you get 0.09 acre feet per acre. You guys know how much it takes to grow grapevines? Not 0.09. That's like growing tumbleweeds, right? It takes about 2 acre feet maybe in the neighborhood, depends on the variety and all this other stuff, right? Canopy cover or whatever, but it takes in the neighborhood around 2 acre feet to grow grapevines. Now, if you include the 14 to 15 inches that you get on average in a wet year, you're at 1.26. So we can't quite grow grapevines with that. So that's option one, is every acre gets a little bit of what's actually available from the ground. Option two is that, well, you take that same amount of water, that 39,000, but you only spread it out over farmed acres and municipalities. So some of the mountain areas and stuff, they don't really need water, right? But of course, if you own that land, you want your share of the water so you can sell it. So there's a problem there. But if you're to spread it out over only the farmed acres here, you get back basically now you get close to a foot. Then you include the water from rainfall, and now you get about your 2 feet. So can the Paso Robles Basin be sustainable? The answer is yes, if farmers work together. But if you don't own land that's currently being farmed and you have like a mountainside, you're probably not going to be down for option number 2. You're going to be down for option number 1, so you can turn around and sell some of that water. So the metric program, if you want information about how those satellite images are being created and stuff, or if you ever need a basin to be this, you can use this link, and they can, Dr. Howes over there at Cal Poly can help you with that program. Okay. Is that working for you back there? Nice. Okay. So what do you do? Right. I know I've only got a couple minutes left. Okay. So what do you guys do here locally? Right. That's kind of what maybe you want to know. Yeah. And I don't really have any good solutions for you, but I'll give you some ideas here, right? Options that you can do to meet your sustainability needs, assuming you're farming or you're working with somebody that's farming or something like that, right? The first is that you can do irrigation equipment upgrades. There are options out there, right? Flow meters, for example. One of the things I always tell students is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? If you didn't have a fuel gauge in your car, how would you know when you needed to get fuel? Right? You'd be like, oh, I ran out. Damn, it's time to get fuel, right? Or maybe you do some calculations or whatever. But if you have a fuel gauge, it makes it a lot easier to manage, right? The same is true if you have flow meters on your wells or whatever. It's a lot easier to know, am I sustainable? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? VFD stands for variable frequency drive. That's what this picture is here of this panel. This now adjusts the pump to use a minimum amount of electricity and get you the flow and pressure that you need. So that way you're not only providing the proper amount of water, but you're also using all the energy that's only necessary to do that, right? And so you can make equipment upgrades like this. Automation, you know, being able to control things through a computer and monitor what's happening, right? Those are the kinds of things. And here's my little sales pitch. Laurel does all of that stuff. Okay, so if you know anybody that needs help with any of that stuff, we can definitely help you with that. Irrigation system evaluations. The ITRC on campus actually teaches a class. I used to teach it for years, where we would actually show people how to go out to their fields and set up catch cans, where to set them up to determine how well is that irrigation system performing, right? If that system is not performing very well, then you better do something about it, right? Because you only have a finite amount of water. If you want to maximize your acreage, you better be using that water as wisely as possible or as beneficially as possible. Vineyard team also is local here in the north. They have this CIP certified, which is sustainable irrigation practices. And a lot of the growers around here, you'll see if you go to the vineyards or whatever, your boyfriend works at some vineyards, right? And they will have big signs next to their vineyards that says CIP certified, meaning they are doing these things of getting system evaluations and making sure they have the right equipment and stuff to be as beneficial with the water as possible.